late 19th century witnessed a significant chapter in world history as European powers scrambled for control over the African continent. This period, commonly referred to as the Scramble for Africa, was marked by an aggressive pursuit of territorial acquisition, economic exploitation, and political domination. While it fundamentally reshaped Africa's political and social landscape, it also intensified rivalries among European nations and had far-reaching global implications. The context of colonial expansion. Colonial expansion during the late 19th century was not a new phenomenon. European powers had been engaging in exploration, conquest, and colonization since the Age of Discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries. By the 19th century, many parts of the Americas, Asia, and Oceania had already come under European control. However, Africa remained relatively untouched, with European influence largely confined to coastal trading posts and select colonies such as Algeria, the Cape Colony, and Angola. Several factors spurred renewed colonial expansion in the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution had transformed European economies, creating a demand for raw materials such as rubber, minerals, and agricultural products, as well as new markets for manufactured goods. Nationalism further fueled colonial ambitions, as countries sought to assert their dominance on the global stage. Additionally, advancements in technology such as steamships, railroads, and the Maxim gun gave European powers the ability to penetrate and control vast territories. Africa, with its rich resources and relatively unexplored interior, became an irresistible target for European expansion. By the 1870s, explorers such as David Livingstone and Henry Morton Stanley had mapped much of the continent, sparking European interest in its potential wealth. The Berlin Conference and the Division of Africa. The Scramble for Africa began in earnest in the 1880s and was formalized by the Berlin Conference of 1884–85. Hosted by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, the conference aimed to establish rules for the peaceful division of Africa among European powers and to prevent conflicts over territorial claims. Representatives from 14 countries, including Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, and Belgium, attended the conference. Notably, no African representatives were present. The Berlin Conference established the principle of effective occupation, which required powers to demonstrate control over a territory before claiming it. This principle set off a frenzy of territorial acquisition as European nations raced to establish their presence across Africa. Borders were drawn with little regard for existing ethnic, cultural, or linguistic divisions, creating artificial boundaries that would have lasting consequences for the continent. Major players and territorial claims. Several European powers played leading roles in the scramble for Africa, each pursuing its own strategic and economic objectives. 1. Britain, the British Empire, sought to secure control over key trade routes and resources. Its colonial ambitions in Africa were epitomized by the vision of a Cape to Cairo railway, linking British territories from South Africa to Egypt. By the end of the 19th century, Britain had established control over vast territories, including Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, and Rhodesia, modern-day Zimbabwe and Zambia. 2. France focused on establishing a west-to-east axis of colonies across Africa. French territories included Algeria, Senegal, Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, and parts of Central Africa. France's colonial empire in Africa was second in size only to Britain's. 3. Belgium. Under the personal rule of King Leopold II, Belgium established control over the Congo Free State in the 1880s. The Congo became infamous for the brutal exploitation of its resources, particularly rubber, and the atrocities committed against its people. 4. Germany. Although a latecomer to colonial expansion, Germany acquired territories in East Africa, modern-day Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi, Southwest Africa, Namibia, Togo, and Cameroon. 5. Portugal. Portugal sought to retain and expand its historical claims, including Angola and Mozambique, while linking them across southern Africa. 6. Italy. Italy, a relatively new nation-state, aimed to assert its status as a global power by acquiring territory in Eritrea, Somalia, and later Libya. These powers justified their actions through a variety of ideological frameworks, including the concept of the civilizing mission. Colonial propaganda portrayed Europeans as bringing progress, Christianity, and modernity to Africa, even as they exploited its resources and people. Consequences of the Scramble for Africa. The impact of the Scramble for Africa on the continent was profound and multifaceted, shaping its political, economic, and social structures. 1. Disruption of African societies. The arbitrary division of Africa by European powers often split ethnic and cultural groups across multiple colonies or forced rival groups to coexist within the same territory. This disruption of traditional social structures sowed the seeds of future ethnic tensions and conflicts. 2. Exploitation. Here's the copied text. Consequences of the Scramble for Africa. The impact of the Scramble for Africa on the continent was profound and multifaceted, shaping its political, economic, and social structures. 1. Disruption of African societies. The arbitrary division of Africa by European powers often split ethnic and cultural groups across multiple colonies or forced rival groups to coexist within the same territory. This disruption of traditional social structures sowed the seeds of future ethnic tensions and conflicts. 2. Exploitation of resources. African colonies were transformed into sources of raw materials for European industries. Resources such as rubber, gold, diamonds, and ivory were extracted on a massive scale, often under brutal conditions. In many cases, local economies were reoriented to serve the needs of the colonial powers, undermining traditional livelihoods. 3. Forced labor and oppression. Colonial administrations relied on systems of forced labor to extract resources and build infrastructure. In the Congo Free State, for example, millions of people were subjected to horrific violence, including amputations and killings, to enforce rubber quotas. Similar abuses occurred in other colonies. 4. Infrastructure development. While colonial powers invested in infrastructure such as railways, ports, and telegraph lines, these projects primarily served the interests of the colonizers rather than the local population. Infrastructure development often facilitated resource extraction and military control rather than improving living standards for Africans. 5. Resistance and rebellion. African communities did not passively accept colonial rule. Resistance movements emerged across the continent, ranging from the Zulu Wars in southern Africa to the Mahdist Uprising in Sudan. While many of these efforts were ultimately suppressed, they laid the groundwork for future struggles for independence. 6. Legacy of colonial boundaries. The artificial borders drawn during the Scramble for Africa continue to affect the continent to this day. Post-independence African states inherited these boundaries, which often exacerbated ethnic and political tensions. The human cost of colonization. The human cost of the Scramble for Africa cannot be overstated. Millions of Africans were displaced, enslaved, or killed as a result of colonial conquest and exploitation. Traditional governance systems were dismantled and African cultures and languages were suppressed in favor of European models. The psychological impact of colonization, including the loss of sovereignty and cultural identity, continues to resonate in African societies. The global impact. The Scramble for Africa also had significant global implications. It heightened tensions among European powers, contributing to the geopolitical rivalries that culminated in World War I. The division of Africa also reinforced patterns of global inequality, with wealth and resources flowing from the colonies to Europe. Moreover, the colonization of Africa shaped global perceptions of race and power. European justifications for colonization often relied on racist ideologies, portraying Africans as inferior and in need of European guidance. These attitudes not only underpinned colonial policies, but also influenced broader racial hierarchies in the 20th century. The legacies of the Scramble for Africa persisted long after the end of formal colonization. African nations began to achieve independence in the mid-20th century, and with Ghana becoming the first sub-Saharan country to gain independence in 1957. However, the challenges created by colonial rule, economic dependency, ethnic divisions, and weak institutions continued to shape the trajectories of newly independent states. Movements for decolonization were often inspired by a desire to reclaim African identity, culture, and sovereignty. Figures such as Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, and Patrice Lumumba became symbols of resistance against colonialism and advocates for Pan-African unity. The Scramble for Africa was a defining moment in modern history. driven by the convergence of economic, political, and technological factors. While it allowed European powers to expand their global empires, it came at a tremendous cost to Africa and its people. The artificial borders, economic exploitation, and cultural disruptions of the colonial era continue to influence the continent's development and global relations. Understanding this period is essential not only for grasping the historical roots of Africa's contemporary challenges, but also for recognizing the enduring impact of colonialism on the modern world.